Good afternoon. Welcome back to the channel. This video is not financial advice, not a financial advisor. Do your own research, make your own decisions. Okay, guys, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to be talking about how the industry is on a path to nowhere and right now pretty much at a dead end across the entire space because the only path forward is through the end-to-end on-chain model. It's the only model that solves all the problems of Web 2, but for some reason, the entire industry has avoided even discussing the end-to-end on-chain model publicly, and they've gone out of their way to hide a lot of things from their users, their communities, investors, so on and so forth. And so we're going to unpack this topic a little bit deeper in this video specifically. Now, I will be touching on Cardano in this video. But to be fair to them, this issue is not specific to them or their ecosystem or their team or anything like that. I just did a video about Sui not too long ago, and it's the same general issue. And so I want to ask the question, why are we creating these Frankenstein applications with 10 to 20 different dependencies and numerous scaling solutions when a better model exists? And at this point, it can no longer be assumed that everybody just doesn't know that a better model exists. Now, what you could say is that with the ICP model, it's not ideal for all use cases today. And I would grant anybody who said, yeah, that's a fair point. That being said, it would be an ideal model for tons of different use cases, maybe not all of them, but you could just use the end-to-end on-chain model for the use cases where it made sense. And you could just use the other model, the Web 2 model, for all the other use cases that maybe it's just too early for those use cases to move to the end-to-end on-chain model, right? But why isn't that? Why haven't we seen that happening at all anywhere across the space, right? Why are we still creating these Frankenstein applications, and why are we not even discussing the end-to-end on-chain model? And it's not even like this model delivers, it's not, we're not even comparing apples to apples here. Because let's just say for any given use case, if you try the exact same type of application with this model and this model, you have drastically different products. On this model, the user doesn't own the application. On this model, the user does own the application. And on this model, you don't have to worry about cybercrime and you don't need firewalls and cybersecurity. Those are very, very big differences when we're just comparing two different types of architecture and models, right? So you don't even get the same product at the end of the day. You have overwhelmingly more risk, overwhelmingly more dependencies and counterparty risk, and you don't even get the same end product. And so we're talking about first principles. And Charles mentioned first principles multiple times in his video today. And so that even further incentivized me to do this video. But for some use cases, the hybrid model will be necessary. I'll grant that to anybody in the industry. Okay. But again, there's numerous different use cases today where the end-to-end model makes sense. And so the purpose of this video is to address important technical issues that have been avoided for years in this space and hopefully start moving the conversation forward. So if you just want to look into like the different scaling solutions and systems and partner networks and solutions with Cardano, or I would say lack of solutions. You have Cardano, you'd have Hydra, which is, I guess, like the layer two that's built for speed. Igon, which is designed to be for storage and computation. And then Midnight, which is supposed to be coming out in the foreseeable future. And that would be the partner chain for privacy, right? But with all of these systems and all these four systems together, you still don't have the necessary components to build full working web applications. And so with all four of these systems, they can't even do what ICP can do by itself. And so with all these systems, you don't have enough to build full web applications, and you need numerous other dependencies, which we'll get into in a second. And even after adding the other systems, these systems, even after adding them, you still have tons of other problems with cybercrime delivering a real Web3 model and all the complexity and fragility that comes along with this model because it is Web 2 reincarnated. It is Web 2 with adding a layer 1 blockchain. ICP by itself is enough to build full web applications on chain that the user owns and that doesn't need firewalls and cybersecurity. And so when we're talking about first principles, guys, when I bring up the dependency issue, and how you don't just continue adding new components and increasing complexity if it's not absolutely needed. This is basic fundamental principles of all types of technical systems. Forget about just software. Okay? You don't just start making things overly more complex for no reason if you don't have to. And the fact that the most simplified, most secure model is being avoided at all costs across the entire industry, that is very interesting to me. And I would like to ask more questions about what else may be going on in this industry that's leading people to avoid the most secure, most streamlined model like the plague, right? So we're comparing this model to this model. And keep in mind, if you're a Cardano user, but again, I'm not picking on them because the same concept applies to Ethereum. The same concept applies to SUI users. This only doesn't apply for like layer one networks that I don't know if I've already said this, but like layer ones that specifically brand and market themselves as enterprise grade blockchains that are specifically targeting institutions. They're not trying to, play the whole DeFi game. They're just, we're a institutional product. We're marketing to the enterprise space. Period. End of story. Shout out to all of those teams and those foundations because they didn't muddy the waters with retail and all these different Frankenstein-based applications because that has set the conversation back years. Years. That's why we're still talking about transactions in this industry, as opposed to talking about the self-writing internet and talking about fully on-chain applications and the benefit of fully on-chain applications and all the problems that this solves. And so the fully on-chain model, you solve for ownership, you solve for security, and you solve for the most streamlined model with the least amount of dependencies possible. But the model is avoided at all costs in favor of this for all use cases, not just for the use cases where it makes sense, for all use cases. If you're in the Cardano ecosystem today and you wanted your own website that you owned and controlled, right? That didn't have all these, didn't have all the complexity of Web 2 because you're not a developer. You just want your own website that you own and control. Where else? There's nowhere else on earth that you could go to find that. But let's say, speaking hypothetically, that certain people in the Cardano Foundation or IOHK or any of the other connected entities around, let's just say they were to, say, hey guys, like these are the different types of use cases where if you do want to use ICP and maybe create some type of Cardano ICP based application or solution, here's the different use cases that might make sense today. If we would have heard something like that from any of these foundations, I wouldn't be addressing this publicly at this point, but we haven't. And it's like at this stage, the self-writing internet's already out. And when you're starting to see like how much caffeine is progressing, it's just further highlighting ICP is in its own category completely in this entire space. And it's only going to continue to accelerate. To Dom's, I forget what Dom said in that tweet about a year and a half ago. This was before I started my AI video series, but he was just talking about hitting like warp speed or something like that. How they're going to hit warp. That's what when you're talking about the software, this is only going to progress. It's only going to be able to build more and more complex applications, and in 1 to 2 years, it's just like the gap is just going to start widening exponentially, and it's already a wide gap to begin with. But again, for certain use cases, the hybrid model is probably going to make sense today. Okay. That being said, it still has tons of security issues and it still doesn't really offer a Web3 model. But for other use cases, why is this model being avoided at all costs? Is that following first principles? Avoiding the most simplified, most secure model? Is that following first principles? No, it's not. See, founders get very they use terms and in concepts very selectively, like when they're talking about first principles, but yet they're still using a model like this and avoiding this model at all costs, right? And again, like had Charles not mentioned, and see, again, I watched Charles. more often than I should, probably. I should probably find something else to do with my time when I'm just, but again, I have to make sense of what's happening in the rest of the industry. I have to make sense of why this is not really sticking elsewhere in the entire space. And so I have to go out and look and see what's being said, what these other foundations and these other founders and like what they're saying, how they're marketing their solution, what they're saying, like everything else. Like I just have to be able to make sense of it because this is such a simpler thing than the industry has made it out to be. But then you have to get into financial incentives and everything else. But questions, all right? Important questions. If and I do want to omit the networks like Stellar, everything with Ripple and XRP, Hedera, and others that never really got into the whole like marketing specifically to retail. They were more so just branding themselves. We're enterprise grade solutions. We're marketing to institutions, period, end of story. Much respect to them. Seriously. All right. So this is for all the other ones that are more so marketing their layer one as a critical part of the future of Web3 for retail based solutions. When all they're really doing is just slapping a layer one onto Web 2. If foundate questions, very important questions. If foundations know there are better options for certain use cases, asterisk, if they know there are better options now, but they are knowingly deciding not to pursue those options, why would they do that? Think about it. Why would they knowingly decide not to pursue the best technical options that offers their users the best options and the most security and real ownership? Think about the implications. They could be guiding projects that launched on their net, that launched their token on their layer one. They could be guiding those projects, those founders, and their users in the wrong direction. And that will ultimately cost them tons of time and tons of money because they never simply said, there's another model out there. We can use ICP as a partner for certain use cases. And for many of you, that would probably be a better option for you and it would set you up for success. But just think about the implications if they were to do that this early in the game before the market and the industry and the coverage and the narratives and everything kind of forces them to do it. If they were to proactively do that early on, there are certain implications. They could potentially lose a lot of investors, a lot of users, a lot of holders, right? I would argue that they're going to lose more in the long term once people figure out that they were misled for years and years and years, and that this was much more simple than anybody made it out to be in this entire industry. They are continuing to utilize an outdated, technically inferior model exclusively, not just where it makes sense, but exclusively. Why? Are they even trying to build real software solutions? That's a very valid question at this point. Given how the industry has just become a joke and so centered around gambling and shitcoins and leverage, that's a very serious, important question. Are people even trying to build real software solutions? Or are they just here capitalizing on the Web3 push for as long as they can? Because there's probably a lot of layer one founders, and I'm not saying this for Cardano or Sui or anything else, right? I'm just saying that this probably does exist in the space. Layer one founders that say, I know Web3 is going to move forward. I know this tech is going to be the future of the web. However, the network that I built might not be a part of that. However, I can capitalize on the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and I can capitalize on the big Web3 push. And then once it's all over, I can just say, well, we tried our best. See you later, guys. We're shutting down operations. How many projects have we seen already do this? And you're going to see many more projects do that. Because a lot of different projects and founders, they're not even trying to succeed. They're not trying to create real working solutions. That might explain why they avoid the most simplistic, most secure model that actually solves for Web3. Because they're not trying to solve real problems. They're just trying to capitalize and extract with the time that they have. And I would argue, again, they are riding the coattails of the real innovators and the real builders who built the real Web3 model that's going to carry this into the future. So are they just here capitalizing on the Web3 push for as long as they can? And then they get to exit years later as an extremely wealthy entrepreneur? I see people, guys, there's people that do this in this very ecosystem. They launch projects with no intention of following through with any real plan or any real solution. Think about how many different projects just in the ecosystem. So it's like the patterns repeat on a smaller scale, but even across the entire industry. Launch projects with no real intention of becoming a successful project or a company. Then, when they run out of new users or buyers, or when things start to die down, they just abandon. They just abandon ship. VCs almost have certainly invested in projects, many projects, just because they can make a quick buck by getting in at like pennies on the dollar and then just dumping everything later on once they can get retail sucked in. Yeah, and so I'm almost positive many VCs have invested in tons of different projects just because they can make a quick buck, not because they believe in the future of that specific project, team, or solution. So, plausible theory. If layer one foundations, some of them, not all of them. I think there'll be numerous layer ones that exist in the future, but just I think there's a lot of them that are going to die out, but they're not going to come out and tell that. They're not going to come out and openly announce their intentions to all their users. But why? Because their users would just dump before they could. Um, if many layer one foundations have given up on being one of the main networks for Web3, in their minds, they're like, we're at best just going to hope to survive if we continue doing this, but we're not going to be an integral part of the future of Web3. And that's where they're at mentally. They obviously wouldn't say that to everybody, right? And they would likely, in my opinion, they would likely just try to capitalize on whatever time they have left, dangling the carrot of new upgrades, new scaling solutions. Oh, it's just around the corner. People can criticize Definity however they want. Caffeine is hands down, with no close second, the best product in this industry by orders of magnitude. So price action might suck. People can complain about marketing, but from a technical perspective, they have delivered a product and a solution that is light years beyond anything else in this fucking space. By continuing to dangle the carrot, after we get XYZ in place, then everything will be ready, right? After this next upgrade, after this next partner chain, after we get midnight in place, everything's going to be ready to go. It's like with Ethereum, how many different scaling solutions do you need? It's like this endless, it's scaling solutions to infinity. It's been like 10 years for some of these networks, guys. Where are the products? Where are the products? Caffeine is light years ahead of any other project or product in this space. And this is the thing. They are not against dependencies. Ethereum is not against dependencies, obviously, because they have tons of dependencies and they've implemented scaling solution to infinity strategy. Cardano is not against dependencies. They are against using and even discussing ICP specifically as a dependency. That's where red flags start going up for me. Maybe not initially, which I wasn't doing these videos 2 years ago, right? But now that it's been going on for a lot longer period of time, and you're kind of like looking around, and it's like, wait a second, this is not adding up, right? So they're not against dependencies. It's a very important point to make. But it's almost like they will only work with certain and recommend and discuss certain dependencies that they are already partnered with, right? And almost certainly, in my opinion, everything is case by case, have a mutually beneficial relationship when it comes to financial incentives. I would argue that that's probably a big driving force for why a lot of things happen in this industry. If they recommend, think about this, if they recommend ICP for certain use cases to users and founders, the users and the founders would benefit, but there's no real financial kickback for the layer one foundation, right? And you run the risk at losing those users and those founders and them just moving to ICP entirely. But I feel like if a lot of these different layer one foundations, a lot of these project founders, if a lot of public figures in the industry were proactive and on the front end about the end-to-end on-chain model and they were honest about everything, they would likely, I think their marketability would increase over time if it's inevitable that we're moving to that model anyways. If it's inevitable that we're moving to that model anyways, and regardless of what any of these people say, short term or long term, that's going to be the end goal. If that's inevitable, then them getting out on the forefront and them being proactive and getting people to the right answer sooner would likely help their marketability long term, even if short term they took a hit because some people just said, I'm just moving everything to ICP. Why not? If they recommended Um, okay. If they help establish their own, think about this, these different layer one foundations. If they help establish their own scaling solutions and work out financially beneficial arrangements with their team and the new team that's running the scaling solution, then solely promote them as their partner, as their scaling solution, as the thing that's going to take Ethereum or Cardano or Sui or what insert whatever other layer one. Again, I don't want to pick on any one layer one or foundation, but if they have these mutually beneficial relationships with their partners in their scaling solutions and solely promote them, they win from a financial perspective and their partners win from a financial perspective. But the founders, and I'm talking about the founders like the project on the people that launch their token on these different networks, those founders and the users and the later stage investors, all the little guys, they all get screwed. But a lot of these founders, the main founders of like the layer ones and the scaling solutions, they make out with millions and millions and millions. But it's been 10 years. Tons of scaling. This is Ethereum. Tons of scaling solutions. Where are the products? Still no Web3 model. Still no security. The product is, this is the product, guys. The tons of founders that make millions. That's the product of this industry. You have a bunch of VCs and founders that make millions. Early investors win, those founders win. Users and normal investors lose, along with project founders. Assumptions to avoid. Everyone is really trying to work towards real solutions. I would abandon that assumption if that's something that you're genuinely, if that's how you're viewing this space, I would abandon that assumption today. You see tons of it. Think about this. If you really look at this space as if everybody's trying to work towards real solutions, guys, that doesn't look at our ecosystem. We have the majority of different people that launch projects have no intention of solving real problems or following through. And that's why you have so many abandoned projects. And the same thing is going to happen on a larger scale. A lot of these different teams, because they're doxed and they're public and they have years worth of like, public discourse and different things in the public domain that are out there, they have to manage the way that they, I'm not going to say abandon, but scale out. They have to manage that a little bit more responsibly and transparently so they don't get jammed up. But everyone, another assumption to avoid. Everyone is being intellectually honest with their words and their actions. Nope. Too many financial incentives. Too much power and influence up for grabs. People in a position to know don't know. For most of these people, guys, if we can figure it out, if I can figure it out, and like this was figured out years ago, at least from my point of view, at least from me specifically. Okay. I've avoided doing a lot of these videos for a long time. But for people who are in a position to know, they likely know what's going on. That's probably why they act the way that they do, is because they know what's going on, because they know they only have 2, 3, 4, 5 years left to capitalize on the Web3 gold mine before it becomes clear to the public who is who in this space. Before it becomes clear to the public that this ICP is its own thing entirely, and the self-writing internet is the future of Web3, and everything else is just hoping for the best as a aspirational satellite chain. Once people see that, the grift is over. The days of make-believe go bye-bye. Prominent figures, another assumption to avoid, prominent figures in this industry would not knowingly screw over hundreds of thousands or millions of people. Once they realize where ICP is as far as development, they'll start working towards collaboration between networks. No, I think that they will after they have to, meaning that the market works itself out. There's a lot of coverage, a lot of attention. They're starting to get questions. They're starting to get pushback from users, from investors, from media. Once that happens, once they have to start to pivot, they will. But expecting them to just pivot because it makes sense, because it's the best model, because it's going to offer their users real ownership and real security, they're not going to do that. It would be in the best interest of their users for certain use cases, but against their own personal financial interests. Closing. It is reasonable to assume that a lot of prominent figures in this industry know exactly what's going on, and that's why they're acting the way that they are. That's why they aren't pursuing real solutions and models that can offer their users much better options. And the pattern repeats across layer one foundations, VCs, and the media, likely because their financial incentives are all intertwined. Everyone is using ICP and the real Web3 model to sell ICP narratives. See, they are riding the coattails of the real innovators and builders at Definity, in my opinion, because they're selling Web3 to the public when there's only one Web3 model. While they're selling Web3, while not even offering a Web3 model and not pursuing a real Web3 model in any way, not even where it makes sense for those specific use cases. They likely know they avoid the Web3 model at all costs, and they avoid the dependency conversation at all costs because it exposes so many other things. It brings so many other things to light when you really start getting into the dependency conversation, which is 100% a first principles concept in the world of just building systems in a general sense. They likely know they only have a few years left before the reality of what's going on becomes more apparent to more people, and they are taking advantage of their perceived importance and influence while they still can, before ICP inevitably takes over the conversation. This is one of those situations where you really have to look at this objectively. Most people don't, and they get lost in narratives, emotion, price action, propaganda, so on and so forth. You have to go beyond the surface level and really get into the details. If you're having doubts today, that's normal, especially given the market just rolled over again. But I would urge you to objectively look at caffeine and then compare it to any other type of product you can find in this industry and the implications of a product like caffeine. Not just that it's a self-writing application, the fact that it's a self-writing app that can build you a custom app that you own, that's on a network that doesn't need cybersecurity and IT. Okay? There's nothing else like this on earth. So if you're having doubts, totally reasonable. This space is an entire scam. It's one giant never-ending psyop. And so I understand why you would be having doubts. But you really do, to make it, you're going to have to look at this objectively and remove all emotion and just honestly assess the situation. L1s have implemented a scaling solution to infinity model that leads absolutely fucking nowhere. The only outcome seems to be their own financial gain. I can't see any other end product here outside of their own financial gain and at the expense of their users and many of their investors, the ones that everybody that got in, everybody that didn't get in at the very beginning. However, this is to some degree a waiting game scenario. The industry is heavily corrupted, and that was likely done for a reason, in my opinion. If everyone was supposed to know exactly where this was going and how it comes together and which networks would carry the load, they would know because it's not that hard to explain. Somebody could just, repackage all of my stuff on bigger platforms and get the information out to the public. However, If people were supposed to know, they would know. Everything that's happened with ICP over the last 4 years, in my opinion, was not by accident. And the industry and the puppet masters that run this industry and that oversee this entire operation, they will move things forward when they're ready to move things forward. Because at the end of the day, there's a much bigger conversation here about the future of the internet. This is as big of a thing as there could ever be. The internet, the web itself, runs the entire world. And migrating from one web to another web is like the biggest technical operation ever in world history. And so I understand to some degree why there has to be deception, why there has to be a lot of smoke and mirrors and a lot of misdirection in this space. But don't let it get the best of you. Okay. You have to really look at this as objectively as you possibly can. I do want to shout out ICP Hubs Egypt because I saw this post earlier. They were just talking about how much Cardano was going to spend. Looks like it's about $25 million USD, I think. Don't quote me on that. On critical integration, stablecoin infrastructure, so on and so forth. But ICP Hubs Egypt said the irony is that we, ICP Hubs Egypt, has already started building a lot of these solutions and capabilities for Cardano without them needing to burn tens of millions. I haven't looked into exactly what they're building and the different solutions and how it aligns with or potentially aligns with what Cardano is looking for. But it goes back to the same conversation. It's like more complex, inefficient, expensive models are being pursued and models that aren't really secure. These models that don't deliver on Web3, these models are being pursued, and a lot of time, energy, and resources is going into this model for what? What are they working towards? It's literally a path to nowhere because it doesn't solve real problems. Even if you finally get to working applications, okay, cool, working applications that don't have real security and that don't offer the users any ownership and that don't actually offer a Web3 model. So you just have Web2 applications with a layer one blockchain slapped to the side of it. Awesome. That's the state of this industry right now. The only path forward that I see is with ICP at the center. It's the only thing that looks like Web3. It's the only, period. It's the only thing that solves real problems. That's it. Self-writing internet in caffeine is the best, most complete, most advanced product by far in the whole entire industry. And every week and every month that passes from here, it's just going to widen the gap between ICP and everything else. And the layer one foundations and the different public, it's everybody who's late to the game is going to suffer for it. Their reputation, their image, their technology, everything will suffer the later you are to this game in this space. Because all of my stuff is public. People can go back and look at me saying the same thing a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And at some point, people, once they find out what's really going on in this space, they're going to start looking around and saying, why hasn't anybody else been saying this? This is not one of those things that you want to be late to the game on. If you're trying to be considered and viewed as a serious public figure who knows what they're talking about in this industry long term. Short term, sure, narratives can win the day, fake price action can win the day, but long term, it's all about real technical solutions that solve for Web 2, period. That's all I have for this video. This was not financial advice. Do your own research. Take care. Have a good day. I'll see you in the next video.